Good afternoon. Thanks again, Wim. I really appreciate it, Kate, for getting everything put together. So for those of you on the call, the session together for today, my goal is to really try to engage you on multiple levels, challenge your thinking on how you lead innovation, and offer solutions and a roadmap to help you and your business move forward with research-based ideas with practical lessons and how to apply them. If you saw the session just prior to this, I think you'll see a bit of an inversion in what happened. So if you did catch it, Ben's story was much more science-based, which is fantastic, and maybe less practical application. What you're going to see for this session here, so an interesting follow-on, is really very much an inversion to that. And then what I'll do is somewhere around the midpoint, I'm going to bring on Professor Chris Long. Chris is a professor of management from St. John's. I took a class with him a few years ago at Georgetown, and he's still doing some adjunct work there now at St. John's. I can tell you that his research and leadership work have been instrumental in helping me frame my thinking as a leader on Wall Street and certainly now as a coach, and did a lot of work to help me really figure out and frame my thinking for my book, The Optimizer. So I'm going to pose questions throughout. So I'd ask you to jump in and share your ideas and examples as we go. And so really, I'm hoping we can chat and really kind of learn from each other today. So my first couple of questions, really, I'd love to get a sense of where people are calling in from. And make sure that the chat box is working. Hopefully we're on track there. And I also have a question for you. If you see the picture here, right, it looks a little bit like how birds fly in formation. If you know and have a quick answer to why birds fly in this formation, I'd love to hear your answer to that. And by the way, I'm in the Washington, D.C. area. But if you want to just take 30 seconds here, if you have a thought on that, where you're calling it from, and if you know why birds fly in that formation, I think that'd be a fun way to start. Upstate New York, Chattanooga, efficiency. I think you're a lot of people in the ballpark drafting off each other. New York, Mohammed doesn't know. I'm not sure if he doesn't know where he's from or what the bird thing is about. It's unclear. Manila, Massachusetts, welcome. Brazil, Pennsylvania, I love it. Such an incredible number of time zones here at all hours of the day. Oh, there's Finland. Hi, Jesse. New Zealand, Germany, breaking resistance, Toronto, Austin. I love it. Stronger together. Hi, Andreas. So birds fly in this pattern, so the colleague behind them faces less wind resistance. The leader makes the journey easier for them. They're removing an obstacle, right? And thank you all for sharing that. So as you travel, each bird is given the opportunity to lead, making the journey easier for each other. So they're intentionally removing these obstacles and giving others the chance to lead are really two key elements of leading a team of serial innovators, or optimizers, as I like to call them. So, much like this conference, right? Innovation has no geographical or industry constraints, but the challenges to make innovation happen oftentimes are quite consistent. So on our journey together today, what I'm going to address are what stops or stalls innovation? What can we learn from history about it and how it's impacted people over time? And then how do you enable, empower, and sustain not only this innovation mindset, but to do so consistently and to get your team to constantly be exploring improvement and why this method works. And as I said, you're going to hear a number of practical examples along the way as we go, and I will have a number of questions for you, so please jump in when that happens. So what's the essence of my argument? Working as a sales leader and executive on Wall Street for over 23 years, and now about 2 years as a coach, researching leadership and innovation, studying and interviewing dozens of companies for my book, I really believe it boils down to one key concept, and that is psychological safety. Without a doubt, there are enormous repercussions in leading change. And a lot of them, I believe, revolve around this safety concept. So we're going to talk about that. And let's take a closer look at the key points, right? If your company was listed in the S&P 500 in 1964, you stayed on that list for about 33 years. Innov8rs, an innovation consultancy some of you might have heard of, predicts that in just a few years, the S&P average tenure will drop 64% to 12 years, which is pretty staggering. Look no further than Macy's. Just this past year, you might know that Macy's, after spending decades, Macy's, a big international or big U.S. retailer, after spending decades and having an enormous brand in the marketplace, actually got moved to the S&P 600, which is the small cap, meaning they dropped below 1.6 or so billion dollars in market cap. So there's no guarantee once you get on this list that you're going to stay there. So here's my point. Leading and driving change are inextricably linked, right? As a leader, you have to drive change, and the need for change is only accelerating. And at the same time, you've got this conflicting problem, which is change is what oftentimes employees fear the most, and that's what can stop or stall change. So how do you connect this gap? The answer to that question is highly dependent on the level of safety your team feels and the degree to which they embrace this change mindset that I believe you can develop. At the center of this idea is leading and managing the emotional journey of change. Building and leading a culture of serial innovators or optimizers requires you and your team to intentionally allocate time to creating a safe space and process for consistent discovery, risk-taking, and execution. Right? You're asking people to commit time consistently to get outside their comfort zone, and that can be scary. And the way to do this is that you as a leader work to reduce that wind resistance, much like the birds do for their team, or in this case, reduce change resistance. Excuse me. Change resistance it's really highly tied to the emotional journey of change. And this is why incremental steps, I believe, or optimizing is the way. Everyone can take small steps, and those small steps can deliver enormous change over time. We'll look at specific examples and what that looks like. But really, in summary, this idea about serial optimization or continually optimizing is really to go small to allow you to go big, right? Start small, incremental change can add up over time and turn into something very meaningful. So to make this happen, it requires intentional, thoughtful, proactive work to create a world where your team can be unleashed, offer their talent to the organization, and live, quite frankly, a more fulfilled life. If you've ever read anything by Teresa Amabile and the progress principle, very much tied to that. People want to see progress, but they aren't going to necessarily look for it on their own if they don't feel like they're in a safe space. And more importantly, the change you need, it's not going to happen by chance. So with innovation comes change. And the key to that is always finding time for you and your teams to get outside your normal routine. So let's take a closer look at what a safe environment can do. Right? Innovation can very much be hindered by the emotional journey. But as we know, innovation is about taking risks. So without safety, emotions can quickly be front and center and just stall things dramatically. I've seen this problem again and again. A key driver to me really writing this book was seeing this so many times over the years and really seeing people not letting their talents, their gifts get unleashed and offering them to their organization and to help that business drive. So it's tied to this feeling of not feeling safe and not feeling like they can take risks. And oftentimes they'll not only stall risk behind the scenes, but they'll fight it. And many times as a leader, you might not even know that's happening until it's too late. And that's really an unfortunate place to be in. So unless this safe environment is happening, it can be a very challenging environment. So how do you make this work? How do you consistently and intentionally, if you consistently and intentionally build a team, build trust with your team and a safe roadmap for their growth, I believe everyone can take this leap, as we see in the picture here, and be a contributor to driving change for your organization. And let's face it, not every idea is going to be a success, right? I think we know that. And not every idea is created perfectly. That's always the case. But you can develop a process and a mindset to consistently draw out your team's creativity and value generation, together, doing it together and really deliver results at the same time. And this system can be embedded in your culture and become a tool for not only driving change, but elevating the skill set for everyone on your team, or what I like to call lifting the curve, or in this case, the talent curve. So what if bad ideas come forward? They will. And it's how you manage and foster those ideas that will determine your success going forward with really driving innovation. So this isn't about asking people to stop doing their day-to-day jobs. Not at all. This is about, it's about reframing your intent, your messaging, and your mindset as a leadership team and asking everyone to join the journey of growth and making your team members feel safe to take those risks consistently. So not everyone's going to make an equal contribution. Not everybody can, and that's okay. Again, that's not what this is about. This is about guiding everyone to grow consistently together and deliver on the mission of your company. So here's a question. Is this journey unfounded or a new phenomenon? And I have to tell you, it took a lot of digging to find this story. This is one I found in researching my book, Henry Burton. So if you think fear of change is a new or recent phenomenon, Henry Burton in 1637 was jailed by the King of England for being deemed an innovator. I mean, that is just mind-blowing. And essentially, he put out this pamphlet that was 200 pages long, and in it, essentially talked about helping to make the church more conservative, believe it or not, but in doing so, challenged the power of the king. The king saw this and said, that guy's an innovator, and literally that's what he was thrown in jail for being deemed an innovator. It's hard to believe that a word was so vilified that is relied on so much for economic growth today. So after the Burton case, innovation was basically demonized for 300 years. But innovation didn't stop. It was repurposed or renamed really to renovation, restoration, and reformation, words deemed a lot less threatening. And it wasn't until the late 30s when Joseph Schumpeter wrote his book on business cycles that really freed innovation, if you will, and let it run a new course. It certainly didn't eliminate all the problems with the emotional journey of change, but it changed the trajectory of it and allowed that thinking to sort of come back, if you will. So, it did enjoy some new freedom. He was largely billed as the liberator of innovation, but it still faces a legacy of this emotional change, and that innovation always brings about. So let's talk about that journey for a bit. So I'd love for you to just pop a few thoughts in the question and the chat on here. When you think about emotional responses, when you think about change inside your organization, what does that look like? What types of emotional reactions come when you talk about change or leading innovation inside of your company? Fear. Thank you, Gene. Absolutely. That's a big one. Feeling threatened, for sure. Thanks, Michelle. Unhappy manager, definitely. Compliance, no doubt about it. Doubt. I love that. Thank you, Jesse and Wim. Right, opportunity, loss of power, job security, right? Innovators. What did Susan say here? Suzanne, feel the same fear, but do it anyway. Yeah, well put, Suzanne. Walls coming up, risk, without a doubt. So here's difficult, right? Here's my thinking on this. As a leader, we have to recognize that this is happening around us, right? With change comes this emotional journey. And I love the example of the elephant here. If anyone's ever been to a zoo or the circus, they've probably seen this, right? The elephant is tethered to this tiny post. So why do they sit there and never move? This animal that weighs a few tons, they could easily rip the stake out of the ground. They don't do it. They've been tethered to this post their entire lives. Right. And as leaders, as managers, I believe we can tether our employees to this if we don't create an environment where they feel safe and have the ability to take risk. So let's take a deeper look at the emotional journey. And I think all of these were named, right? Fear, loss, uncertainty, shame, a few others. Thank you. Walls going up, Carla, right? People getting defensive. History has shown us in the world of business that if change is coming, it oftentimes doesn't end well for the employees. So the reactions aren't that surprising, right? Fear of disruption to your current happenstance, loss of control of your power structure, uncertainty of what's next, job security, and shame and feeling badly for who we are can play a part in halting this change initiative. These are powerful forces and they simply can't be ignored. But I'd like to take just a minute or two here and focus on shame because I believe it's probably the most powerful force on this page. It can come from two directions. One, if I'm the person, I go out and take a risk and it doesn't work, I failed, right? And now if this isn't a safe environment that I live and work in, I have to go to explain to people, my boss, my coworker, my spouse, my friends, that, hey, I tried something and I failed. And suddenly now I've lost this image of myself that I've built up. And I very much could feel ashamed. So that's this internal push from shame. I would argue there's also an external force from shame. And that's about leaders helping to guide this journey, specifically around messaging it. Because if change initiatives aren't framed properly, right, it could be thought of or seen as, hey, we need to change because what you're doing doesn't work anymore, which oftentimes people hear as you've been wasting your time for a number of years. I've seen this with firms installed in innovation initiatives, and I found really three key elements that are missing that really help, unfortunately, drive the shame even further. There's no plan or process to make it happen consistently in a safe environment. Little work's been done to get influencers inside the company, not only identifying those influencers, but engaging them in this journey to get their buy-in to help spread the message even further. And this messaging issue that I just referenced. So there's something really powerful here. Research has found that shame is such a powerful force, the fear of failure and shame is such a powerful force that the threat, is such a strong psychological threat that motivation to avoid failure overpowers the motivation to succeed. It's a huge driver of mediocrity. And I don't believe this is because employees want to be average. It's because they don't want to feel ashamed and have to go through that emotional struggle. So that's a look at emotions, the emotional journey for team members. Let's look at it for leaders and what it looks like there, which I think somebody referenced in the chat, which is a great point. I think for leaders, it comes down to three key issues: insecurity, institutionalization, and invulnerability. Right? Insecurity. If we bring about change, gosh, is my seat safe? Am I going to work myself out of a job? If I promote my team members, do I look less valuable to the company? Right? There's insecurity. Institutionalization. We've always done it this way. I mean, how many times have we all heard that in our lifetimes? One of the executives I interviewed in my book, Philip Holt, who's moved companies a couple times over the years. He's now at Microsoft. He shared that when he sees institutionalization, or we've always done it this way, that's the first place he looks at to go look to drive change. And lastly, invulnerability, right? I've got a monopoly on good ideas, so I'll let you know when I have one. And there's a big self-awareness issue here that can be worked on. So often leaders, they don't intentionally want to be this way. It's merely a result of the culture that the leader lives in. And it really further demonstrates that inspiring someone to evolve without trust and safety, it's no easy task. And so leaders need to feel safe as well. So they're really key elements to employ this leading change grounded in empathy and vulnerability, which we'll get into here in just a bit. But so let's take a quick look at, what does this unsafe environment for leaders look like? Right? I think everyone might have sat in this meeting at some point in their careers. And, I can say pretty surely that I have, and it's not a comfortable place to be in, right? We have to create a safe place for leaders to be in as well, and for team members to thrive. So I've shared a bit about the importance of leading the emotional journey and creating safety through the power of small steps or optimizing. But the way you do that starts with instilling the optimizer mindset. So let's take a look at those principles here. So the 4 principles: being vulnerable, being a problem solver, being customer-centric, and a persistent focus on excellence. For our session today, I'm going to spend most of the time highlight the concept of vulnerability. I think that's really a key one here. So as Brene Brown said, if you haven't found her yet, really a fascinating work on vulnerability and shame. Vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change. So let me share with you a real life story about that came out of one of the more interesting interviews of the many interesting interviews from my book. The Motley Fool is a stock investing equity subscription service. Some of you might have heard of the Motley Fool. It's actually based here in the DC area. So in 2008, they've been around since the early 90s, 93, 94. In 2008, the stock market fell roughly 50%. So employees were really anxious because if anyone here on the call remembers, 2000 to 2002 was also a tough period in the markets. And during that time, the Motley Fool laid off a significant percentage of their workforce because they just weren't ready for it. So 2008 rolls around, and instead of going to their boardroom, the leadership team, it's owned, the 2 co-founders are brothers, instead of going to the boardroom, making decisions for how everyone would have to sort of deal with this, they made the ultimate vulnerable move. They got everyone together and announced publicly, no one is going to be let go through the downturn of 2008. I mean, think about that. Just that part in and of itself is extraordinary. They took it a step further and said, but we're all in this together and we need everyone to gather around and find ways for us to cut costs. So think about what they did there and how much they empowered their team. So they didn't say, let's look across and cut 15% or 20% from every department, or let's get rid of this department or stop that project. They said, we're all in this together. Let's make this happen. We need your input to make this work. So employees across the organization worked tirelessly to go find opportunities to cut costs. And they were able to do so because they felt safe. They knew their job was secure, so they could look around. And instead of sort of turning this into a Hunger Games type situation, they were able to work on this together. So interestingly enough, as a collective, they found the best way to save money. They found a number of ways to save money, but the biggest was cutting the match that the company made to the 401k or retirement plan for the employees. So everyone took part in the pain. They didn't single out any one organization or any one department. They all took part in the pain. The business recovered a year and a half, 2 years later, and Motley Fool took it a step further and they paid everybody back for those missed earnings over that time, which is just incredible. But think about what they did there. Through being vulnerable, they empowered their team members to make decisions, to be part of the journey, and to not sit back and let the sort of the waves wash over them, but to really be engaged in the mission, and they made it work. This was really extraordinary outside the box thinking. But it was also an intentional mindset shift by the Motley Fool leaders. And when they created an opportunity for anyone to put an idea on the table, it helped the company survive and feel safe in doing so. And this is very much still in use today for the Motley Fool. They've built a business literally from their basements and an AOL chat room, if anyone remembers AOL, to over 1 million paid subscribers today. And they consistently win best places to work. Pretty extraordinary results. So why bother with optimization? The change you need, it's not going to happen by chance. So I talked a little bit about safety. I'd love to get your feedback on this one. If you would throw a few thoughts in the chat, in the workplace, how do you create safety? And, I guess I'm leading the witness here a bit, but really to enable innovation in the workplace. I'd love to hear a couple of thoughts around this if you want to throw a few answers in there. I'm going to share a story of my own, and I'll bring Chris in to share his, Professor Long in to share his thoughts on this. Leaders need to role model. Could not agree with you more, Krista. Share and celebrate failure is such a big part of it. Shrink down the unknowns. Love that. Thanks, Suzanne. Position for learning, not pass fail, with no doubt about it. Vulnerability. Thanks, Michelle. Such a key piece of it. Right. Give everyone a voice. Thank you, Eugenio. Celebrate failure and ideas and what not to do. Absolutely. I think Gene might have read my book. Celebrate failure. Let's see. Be approachable. No doubt about it. Still innovation enablement. I love those. Thank you for sharing those ideas. So here's my story on this. A few years ago, I was running a team on Wall Street. It's about a $4 billion a year business. And I had a team member leave. And I had a decision to make. Should I replace him? Should I maybe do a reorganization? What should I do? So after a bunch of analysis and thought, I decided to not replace him and go through a reorg. Well, this reorg was going to have a major impact on somebody on my team who had been with the firm a number of years, was in very good standing with the organization. And it was going to require him essentially to start traveling again a fair amount, hotels, airplanes, all of this kind of thing, after not having to do that. And I thought, boy, he's not going to be really happy about this. So what I did was I reached out to him and said, hey, Dave was his name. Dave, I'm thinking about not replacing this person in Southern Virginia. And you've covered it. If anyone knows Virginia, it's a very large state, but kind of sparsely populated outside of DC and Richmond, the DC suburbs and Richmond. So I said, if you were me and going to sort of reorganize Virginia, how would you do it if someone wasn't in Southern Virginia? First of all, he couldn't believe I asked. More times than not, if change was coming, it was just sort of dumped in his lap, if you will. So he said, give me a few days, I'll look at this. Comes back to me 3 days later, we met at a Starbucks or something. And he came back to me with a business plan that literally overlapped about 75, 80% with already what I was thinking about. Came up with a few wrinkles I hadn't considered yet, which was brilliant. But now think about that. Whose reorg was this now? So this was a massive change that was going to impact his life, but it was now his own custom built, essentially reorg. How many times do we have that chance in our lives? And I just could not take the other approach after all the work I'd done on creating safety and trust with the team. So even though this was disruptive to his life, it was largely his call. Think about this, how it easily could have gone the other way, right? If I came in and said, hey, here's your new deal, take it or leave it, which sometimes happens, he would have spent a lot of time spreading negative energy about that. I bet you would probably have left the company and sort of, put his resume out there. So instead, fast forward 18 to 24 months with his new business plan, customized research, he goes out, executes like crazy, and gets himself promoted in about 18 to 24 months. So why is trust and safety important? Trust enables growth. And I think this was a really good example of that. But I'd love to bring Chris Long on now to just give you a little bit more context around this, because as I said earlier, his research and work has been were really instrumental in my thinking as a leader, and certainly the book that I wrote. Chris, are you able to jump on mic?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, John. Thanks for letting me be a part of this session. And hi, everybody. It is afternoon. One of the things that John didn't mention is that I moved up from Washington, D.C. when I first met John to St. John's University, which is in Queens, which is part of New York City. And so one of the nice benefits of that, which is related to the book, is I actually moved from a place where there's very little innovation happening to another place where innovation is everywhere. And so, in fact, there's a lot of innovation happening in the Washington area. It's just not happening in Congress right now. But we hope that will change in the United States. But one of the things that I did want to talk to you about is just a few issues that I think you can press on for helping people feel more safe and be in a position to innovate more effectively. And so probably the first thing to do is to really get people involved in your decision making. And many of you are probably saying, yeah, I know how to do that. Many of you may be right, but I think that one of the issues that's key to doing this is getting really good at asking the right questions. One of the things that John and I have spent a lot of time talking about is that leaders, the great leaders in our lives, do not sit in our memory because of the answers they came up with most of the time. It's the questions that they asked us. And so if you can ask people and get people to talk about the things that will help them be more innovative, and asking them what can motivate you to be more innovative and creative in this workplace. It's oftentimes a question that's actually never asked of them. And it gives you an entree both to build trust and also some information that you can use to actually build systems in place, both within your own leadership approach and within organizations to actually facilitate this sort of innovation. When you do ask those questions, you want to listen for three things, and they're really the hallmarks or the benchmarks of intrinsic motivation. First of all, how competent do people feel? Do they feel like they can do it? Secondly, what's the level of relatedness that they feel, which is sort of a very jargony word to describe, do they derive meaning from the work that they're doing? And are they doing work with people whom they enjoy being with? And then the third is, do they have sufficient autonomy? And this autonomy element is a really important thing. And what does it mean? Because autonomy is a very loaded word, and I do a lot of work with companies and executives, and it sometimes strikes fear in their hearts. But when we look at autonomy and the research on autonomy, we're focused specifically on something called process autonomy. So if we look at the production function with inputs, processes, and outputs, what we find is that it's okay to actually work collaboratively with your people, setting goals, which are outputs, and also figuring out what resources you need to provide to them, which are the inputs to the production process. The key part of autonomy is really providing them the ways that they know and that they can experiment with to actually translate those inputs into outputs. And when you do that, that's where you are able to unleash their creative energies. And you also show them in very real terms that you trust them, which is the way to build the trust that John talks about, and also demonstrate your vulnerability to them, that you're willing to put the fate of these ideas in their hands. And as John said, both with the Motley Fool example and then his own personal example, is that when you do that, one of the benefits of doing that is that they often come up with the answers that are frankly better than you would have come up with by yourself, but also that they actually are coming up with answers that then they're willing to implement. And as a result, they're helping to contribute to the engine of innovation and optimization that John is talking about. John?
Chris, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Competence, relatedness, and autonomy. And boy, I really, your work on this has been incredible, and it's so fascinating to hear. And I think a big theme you're going to hear as we move into the last stretch of the presentation is really on how to put this into action. And autonomy certainly plays a big part in that. So let's move forward. But Chris, thank you so much. And please stick around if you could for the Q&A in case questions come up.
Sure.
We'll be there in just a few minutes. So let's move on and talk about this enabling idea, right? And here are the key tenets I found to really enable the team to move into this innovative, this optimizer mindset, right? How do you enable them? Develop a personal relationship, right? This is not a one-time event. Let them speak and listen. This is about feedback and giving them a voice. Give credit where credit is due. Well, this is an easy one to overlook, but certainly one that's powerful if you can take the time to publicize it and let people celebrate their wins. As a few people mentioned in the chat, transparency. We can't share everything with our teams because there's just issues that can't be shared, but walk right up to that line if you can and lead by example. I want to share a case study, if you will, on the lead by example point I made. But first I'll say Gallup, a company that does a lot of corporate surveys, you've probably seen work from them. They estimate 70% of variance of employee engagement is driven by their managers. 70%. I mean, that's pretty extraordinary. So here's a mindset shift I'd ask you all to think about or refine if you're not already. And that is thinking about your employees as clients, right? What do you want from clients? A good, mutually beneficial long-term relationship built on trust. Why would we want to treat our employees any differently? I would argue it's equally difficult, if not more so, to get and retain a fantastic employee as it is a client. So let's look at an example here. Patty Brennan, as you see in the quote here, catch a team member. So Patty is one of the most successful financial advisors in the United States. She's on this Barron's Hall of Fame list, which is literally 0.1% of all financial advisors. It might even be smaller than that now. It's virtually impossible given this list. She has done it. So what Patty does is, and someone talked about this in the chat, she celebrates awesome is I think the phrase she uses to describe it. So when a team member does something amazing, she literally grabs, by the end of the day, she grabs everyone in the office, brings them in the conference room, 25 people on her team, and tells everyone what the person did, how they used creative thinking to get there, maybe some of the hurdles they met along the way, how they helped a client, but more importantly, how they benefited their business. And she connects all the dots for the team and takes a moment to celebrate that person. She literally gives them a little trophy, a little 6 or 7 inch trophy, and a nominal cash gift to just as a token of appreciation. But think of the message she sends to her team and her team leaders as an example to how they should think about their teams and how people should think about driving innovation to create results for the business. To give you an idea, so it's very simple, but very powerful. Last year, Patty's team brought in over $160 million in new client assets. That is absolutely extraordinary. And if you know the financial advisory business at all, that is, again, in a class by herself. So once you've established trust and enabled your team, it's on to empowering them. So let's take a look at that, right? This is about creating boundaries. And I love this example that Philip Holt, I referenced earlier. He's a Microsoft, he's an Xbox game studio head at Microsoft. He talks about his thinking is the more boundaries you place around someone, the more it frees someone to create and find new innovative solutions. And the analogy he used was if you give someone a piece of paper and say, draw something, chances are good they're not going to come up with something that you're particularly excited about. If you sit down with them and agree that what needs to be drawn is a tree, for example, as the image here shows, that's where innovation and creativity can begin. So give people freedom to push the boundaries each and every year, but have those boundaries based on your mission, based on your business plan, and what it is you're trying to solve for. Underneath that is giving them the chance to lead, giving them ownership throughout time. Let them lead a call. Let them take the front stage from time to time and have you take a back seat. Just an extraordinary way to empower people. Next piece of this puzzle is lifelong learning, right? We're always going to be facing new challenges. And the more we learn and the more we keep our brain muscle functioning, the better we're going to be able to prepare for the inevitable changes like a global pandemic where we have to shift our thinking very radically and very quickly. Lifelong learning is the anchor to making that happen. And lastly, it's being a trusted advisor, not a boss, not a manager, maybe a leader, probably a coach, but certainly a trusted advisor. And the key to being a trusted advisor is working with people on problem definition, not problem solution, and not being afraid to be wrong. So powerful. So one way Katrina is a principal I interviewed for the book. I'll try to get to the very short version of this story as we're moving quickly towards the Q&A session. She's been a principal for about 8 years. She's in a low-income area in Oregon, west coast of the United States. She has 45 people on her team. Every monthly meeting, she has a team member come forward. She challenges them to work and innovate towards the mission of the school, engaging the students, engaging the community, improving the students' lives and their education journey. Every monthly meeting, she has 1 or 2 people stand up and talk about something they've tried to optimize or innovate and that didn't work. And that she has everyone applaud. And she does that for 2 quick reasons. One, she wants to make people feel not afraid to take risks and to know that they're being celebrated. But more importantly, 45 people on her staff now know a way not to do something. I think that's pretty darn powerful. Just a really powerful example. So, now that you've developed trust, enabled and empowered your team to embrace this new mindset, let's take a look at keeping momentum going. And the last piece of the puzzle, which is sustaining, right? How do you carry this forward and put it into your culture? I'm a big believer in writing change into your business plan, not just your team members, but also the leaders. Along with being their trusted advisor, be their coach. Let them share successes as they go and be flexible. I want to highlight just one piece here on the writing change into the business plan and being their coach. Right? Each and every year, if people go through the simple act of writing something out, 1, it forces them to think about it. 2, they take greater ownership of it. And the second part of this is being their coach as they go through this new plan. And this isn't a plan about this innovation in their business plan. It isn't about completely revamping what they do. It's finding marginal change inside the business of how you underdo a process, or create a product, or how you execute, but help them come up with that solution or that idea that they want to work on. And then be their coach and guide them through this journey and help them continue to define the problem that they're facing as opposed to offering them a solution. So important. And as Harold Serkin and George Stock talk about here, if there is a change issue in your organization, you might look at, or any kind of stall inside your organization, think about fixing the process, not the problem, because that's oftentimes where it sits. people not understanding exactly what it is they're supposed to get done. So let me move into the final leg of this and leave you with a quote. We are what we do and what we bring to our teams each and every day. So to deliver the change we need, our behaviors have to create an environment of safety, enabling our teams to freely identify the challenges and opportunities around us and be great problem solvers to come up with outstanding solutions. And it's not going to happen on its own. So if you're not seeing the change you need inside your organization, I'd ask you to consider three things. One, take an inventory of the level of trust you have with your team. Trust is the key to safety. This is certainly something I'd be happy to have further conversations with folks about. Take a hard look at your calendar. What's on your calendar? What % of those activities on your calendar are dedicated to unleashing the potential on your team? It's not going to be every piece of your calendar, but it has to be part of it, 10, 15, maybe 20%. And lastly, ask yourself, what are you doing to reduce resistance on your teams, making the journey easier for your teams to embrace and really get into this optimizer mindset? So creating this culture, it's not going to solve all of your problems, but if you can incorporate these strategies, you'll find a team that operates with a growth mindset, consistently working to upskill themselves and each other. And it's a team that will challenge themselves to push further, push the envelope further, and they'll want to help each other. This process needs guidance, but it has the ability to take on a life of its own. I've certainly seen that firsthand, and it's a lot of fun when it happens. And the team will begin to pull each other along as opposed to you having to push this, and I think it can deliver tremendous results over time. Those are the end of my prepared comments. I just want to jump in. I'd love to stay connected. If you'd like to do so, here's where to find me online. If anyone would like to schedule a 30-minute chat with me to carry on this discussion one-on-one, I'd be happy to do it. Extremely easy to do on my website. If you would like to learn more and buy my book, it can be found anywhere you buy books online. And in a few weeks, I'll be doing a much deeper dive 2-part session on the lessons from the book in a virtual book club, we'll call it. So with that, let me open it up to Q&A.
Great, John, thank you very much. A lot of food for thought.
Thanks, Wim.
Thanks, Chris, also. It was very, very entertaining and very interesting. We have a couple of questions on the chat already, so everybody please add others that you may have. And I saw one from Susan. Susan, do you want to unmute yourself and ask the question, or do you want me to? So her question was, those people with those traits, do you have to have them already in the organization, or is it better to find them outside?
I believe you have to have both. People that have these traits and people that don't have these traits. If you heard the session earlier, Ben did a great job of explaining having this diverse mindset. And I think that's really important. And I'll tell you, on the team that I led, it was fascinating to watch as we developed this mindset. It was really fascinating to see, outside of my own work, to find it in so many other places. But it was fascinating to see that the least innovative on my people at the end of this journey were really starting to come forward with newer and bigger ideas, even though it was way outside of their comfort zone. So I believe if you can create this environment, everyone can get on board. And if you don't create some level of this environment, your people that are leading the charge and making things happen, I think they can get frustrated with the other folks on your team. So there's an unintended risk hiding in here as well. So I think it's important to help build this mindset for everybody. Cool. Hopefully that answers your question.
Susan? I assume so. There's another one from Michelle. Michelle, do you want to ask the question?
Sure, I'll ask the question. Actually, it's for both John or Chris, which is, in your research, can you give us an example of something that surprised you in your research for the book or other research? Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Chris, you want to tackle that one first? I certainly have a story to share here, but if you have one, please jump in.
I will. Let me follow you. So why don't you share that story?
Thanks. I'll tell you, the thing that really got me, Michelle, was it confirmed for me how low the bar is to create this environment. I mean, it sounds almost silly to say that, but it doesn't take an inordinate amount of effort on behalf of leadership to begin to start this environment. And it can happen. And as I said, it can start to take on a life of its own. So, and I think it's incumbent upon the leaders, and so often this doesn't happen, that they need to put out that olive branch at first to create this environment, because your team members aren't going to do it. But the surprising thing for me, or I'll say the confirmation for me, Michelle, was just how low the bar is to even get this concept started?
I would say I have two answers to that question, Michelle. So thanks for asking it. I would say the first answer I have is the power of the question. And so in looking at leaders and being a leader myself, it's been about that fact that leadership is much more about asking questions than it is about coming up with answers. And the nice thing is that when you ask the right questions, people come up with the answers for you. And so, and it's amazing how rare I think that gift is. I know that I've been at many a party, and maybe I'm not an interesting person, but I've been at many a cocktail party where I spend the evening asking questions, and other people seem to be more than happy to answer my questions, but not ask me any of theirs. So I do think that in that there's an opportunity for leaders, because I think that it's a fairly rare skill. The other issue is this issue of process autonomy. So, I live in both a consulting and a academic world, and autonomy is a big concept in the management literature. But it's the type of autonomy that I was talking about today, which I think is the critical type of autonomy, has never really been explicitly discussed or analyzed, and except by a few people. But I think the distinction that I tried to make for you is really critical, is that you should work with your people to set targets or outputs. You should work with them to identify what resources they need, and then give them as much freedom as you can to figure out how to translate those resources into the outputs that you both have decided are really critical.
Thanks for sharing that, Chris.
You bet.
Great, thanks both. Tim has a question which I've been struggling with also when I was an innovation leader. Tim, do you want to ask the question?
Sure. So maybe, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So maybe the question is the following. I'm actually heading into a new role in innovation, and the approach in the current company is more that a lot of the kind of requests for innovation, in terms of tangible projects and such, they will usually come from, let's say, business unit heads. They might come from, head of e-commerce or something like that. It's a little bit of a different approach, but nonetheless, how do you create and foster that type of, like you said, psychological safety among them? Because obviously, as opposed to an employee, there's a very different mindset there. And normally it's, I would imagine, especially when you're a junior, you don't have quite the same amount of safety that you can project to a more senior leader, I suppose.
So Tim, I want to make sure I'm understanding your question. So you're talking about how do you help the more senior leaders feel safe?
Correct.
I believe the roadmap is quite similar. I talked a little bit about it with, I don't know if you saw the slide with the 3 I's, this insecurity, invulnerability, and institutionalization concept. I believe the same concepts exist in many ways for the whatever level you are at the company. Even if you're a senior leader, I don't know many senior leaders that don't have some level of paranoia about them. I think it was Andy Grove, the gentleman that built Intel, the giant that it was. His famous quote was, "Only the paranoid survive." So maybe not a lot of safety going on there in some ways, but I think the strategies and the tactics are the same. It's getting to know people, it's finding a way to connect with them, and letting them know, either through celebrating mistakes, celebrating excellence. But a culture is what we tolerate and what we don't tolerate. And I think this is something that really can be laid out much more clearly, and we don't always take the time to do. So a key part of my thinking, Tim, is to have these concepts that we're talking about here. How do you create the safe environment at any level? Making them part of your proactive work throughout your year and putting them on your calendar, right? And that's one of the reasons I encourage people to look at their calendars to see, is there something on here at least once a week where I'm trying to connect with my employees, whatever level they are, to create this environment that we're talking about.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Great question. Mohammed, you have a question?
Yes, thank you so much. I have a question for John. I'm gonna quickly an part of a book about artificial intelligence, and I've been a little bit involved in the startup culture in San Diego. And the question is, what if one of the team members, I'm both, you guys, right?
You're kind of cutting in and out a little bit.
Yeah. So I'm assuming that, I apologize. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes? No?
I
Yes.
can hear.
Let me try.
Maybe you could put it in the chat, Mohammed.
Yeah. Mohammed, if you can put it in the chat room, because it's extremely hard to hear you. In the meantime, we can go to Daniel. Daniel, you also have a question?
Yes, I have a question. I'm a director of innovation in a SaaS company, it's a unicorn valued at 3 billion. But my main problem is that we created and we grow massively in the last 2 years. And the moment we now starting this innovation approach to creating a single team, and I understand the entire proposition of creating the right culture, making everyone feel safe. But that's still an isolated team working innovation, experimentation, and exploring how to solve new problems to create a little bit of a growth and disrupt in our own company. The question that I got is, how can I scale and franchise innovation in other teams that work more iteratively with, just maintaining existing products and grow them in a small pace in iteration level. So it's more of how do you manage to include the right culture in teams that are not your own teams?
I know we're running short on time here, but one thought that strikes me with that question, Daniel, thank you for asking it, is starting to bring these other team members into this innovation session, give them some exposure to it, give them some access to it, and start to get their input into it and help them learn. And if it were me, and again, just trying to sort of solve your big problem here in a few seconds, I would think about getting their input, their buy-in to what you're doing, and maybe ask them how you might improve what it is you're working on your innovation team and develop more of a collaborative approach that they can then take back to their team that they're comfortable with. And I think that might be one option to consider.
It's important to consider rewards and gamification as a point of recognition of team members. Is that something that you value as a starting point?
I think as much as people oftentimes say they don't like to be recognized or rewarded, I think they do like it. Patty Brennan, the story I shared earlier about the little trophies, I mean, how inexpensive is that little trophy that she gets? And it has been a cornerstone of her culture to get people to think bigger, to think differently, to think innovatively. So I think simple, doesn't have to be thousands of dollars. I think simple things can go a long way. I have a very, what I think is a pretty interesting story in that I don't think we have time to share right now, but there are plenty of ways to make people feel rewarded without spending a lot of money on it. And
Thank you so much.
That in and of itself might be something to brainstorm on. Yeah.
Thank you.
We have Mohammed to try it again. We have a couple of minutes left, so you want to try again, Mohammed?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect. I apologize about that earlier. So I'm going to be quick. My question is, would assume that every organization have a different rate for the change, like different organizations change at different rates. And what if and I work in the IT, data science, so a lot of innovation, startup culture. And what about when people in the team are not feeling safe enough? Their rate of change, they're improving, but they're not improving up to the whole team. No matter how safety you give them, no matter how much you try to push them. So what should I do in these situations? Should I organizations slow down? Should I make prioritization with team members? What's your advice there? Because I face this a lot. Sometimes you give people a lot of safety, but they just don't want to push their big ideas.
I wonder, the question that comes to my mind there, Mohammed, is, how do you measure that level of safety? How do you measure that level of trust? And that was one of my closing comments in the last slide there with the quote, is around, take a bit of a trust inventory. And sometimes, maybe we think we're doing things that are working, but it doesn't necessarily land with the other person. One of the concepts I didn't get into a whole lot during the run through, but it's certainly covered extensively in my book and some of the work I've done, is this concept of the feedback loop. I can't tell you how powerful that is. And if I could leave one idea for you all, if you haven't done much around this feedback idea, take this simple exercise from Thomas Chamorro-Premuzak, who's a psychology professor at Columbia that he shared with me, or shared in his book last year. Go on Google and type in "my manager is," and just leave the screen right there. And as we all know, Google will auto-populate a bunch of things, and you're going to find a list of 10 highly negative concepts there about "my manager is," and it gives you a sense of what people are kind of thinking about. So, my question, Mohammed, or my thought would be, I would maybe try to dig a little bit deeper, try this Google exercise, and maybe reapproach those people and put out the olive branch to them and ask them, gosh, how would you, it feels like we're not getting where we need to be. How would you go about doing it? If you were me, how would you help me move you along? And that simple question, empowering people like that, I found to be incredibly useful over the years. So bring them into the journey is really what I'm trying to say.
Hey, John, can I add something to this? So,
Sure,
so I
please.
think, and so on John's point, or to extend it some, in order to get people to innovate, they need to have a general sense of safety, but that it's really about safety targeted towards innovation, that it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay to experiment. And the safety that you're providing people is not necessarily focused on being stagnant and not trying. The idea here is that you can have these expectations that people should try to improve, but that if they try and they make mistakes, that's okay. But as long as they're trying and they're attempting to learn, that is really what you're after. So I think that's really where you focus.
How are we doing on time, Wim?
Yeah. No, it's good. So we have to run down or to run down here. I think very, very good discussion. By the way, if you don't get the answer from Google, you can always try Alexa. Maybe she has some suggestions too. But thanks so much for the inspirational discussion and talk, both John and Chris, and everyone for the very good questions and very intriguing ones. There's more that we couldn't cover, but you can see here on the screen where you can contact John, so please don't hesitate. And please do log in about 5 minutes from now for the next innovation session, which is covering Jugaad, which is one of my favorite innovation concepts. So all have a great evening and talk to you later.
Thank you all. Thank you, Wim.
Bye.
Hey, everyone. Bye.